Everyone. I'm just gonna give another minute or so to let folks join us. All right, I think we're good to get started. So good afternoon and welcome to Growing Wisely, a webinar on smart growth and asset management. Thank you for joining us today to learn about asset management and growth. As we know, communities are facing significant shifts as population and demographics are changing. Population growth in particular has contributed to serious gaps in infrastructure, staff capacity, and funding. Policymakers, municipal staff and practitioners, and residents are all feeling the pressure. So as we navigate these growing issues and we come up with new and innovative plans to address them, I think it's really important that we share our experiences and strategies more broadly. My name is Erin Orr. I am a program advisor in infrastructure asset management on the Canada Community Building Fund team at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Before we begin, I'm going to briefly share a little bit more about the Canada Community Building Fund and why asset management and growth matter to the program. So, the CCBF is permanent, predictable, flexible, and upfront funding. By this, we mean that the federal transfer is a reliable source of funding that does not require an application. Moreover, it can be used for a broad range of infrastructure and capacity building projects. So CCBF is a critical funding source for priority infrastructure. To identify these priority projects, asset management and housing needs assessments are fantastic tools. So for that reason, asset management and housing are two key priorities under the CCBF agreements. So for asset management, municipalities are required to develop and implement an asset management culture and plan in accordance with the Ontario regulation. And as for housing, municipalities are required to commit to improve housing supply and affordability by prioritizing infrastructure projects that enable or preserve housing whenever possible. These two priorities do not conflict at all. In fact, we believe that they go hand in hand to enable a capital strategy that considers both proactive asset management and housing. We are hoping to see growth considerations effectively integrated into asset management programs and plans across the province. So in addition to the growth primer and case studies that we will be sharing today, AMO has some webinars and research to support municipalities with these matters. We have also launched 2 new maps. So on the slide, you should see a quick snapshot of the asset management plan map. So that map provides a link to the AMP for each municipality in Ontario. It also shares other valuable information such as census data and reported replacement cost of municipal assets. Now the housing map, alternatively, that one links to the federal housing needs assessments for communities that have completed one. And it also shares census demographics, core housing needs, and reported infrastructure gaps. So you can scan the QR codes here. Have that on the next slide there. So we have 2 QR codes for each map. You can scan them to access the maps, and they are set up for mobile use. With that, I am very excited to jump into today's session and hand it over to my colleague, Jennifer Court from Asset Management Ontario.
All right, thanks so much, Erin. Okay, I'm going to click away from the QR codes now. We can always come back to them later if you need them. So, as Erin said, I'm Jen Court. I'm the Executive Director of Asset Management Ontario. If you're not familiar with Asset Management Ontario, I'll give a very brief overview. We're a community of practice comprised of asset management practitioners who share information and best practices to advance public sector asset management and environmental stewardship of publicly owned infrastructure in Ontario. AM Ontario has worked with over 200 municipalities to deliver mentoring, coaching, and direct asset management assistance, and we offer online certificate courses for practitioners relating asset management, climate change action, and sustainability, and of course, how to manage growth. So here is an overview of our agenda today. We've already heard from Amo for our session welcome and opener. Next, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the materials developed as part of the Growing Wisely project, the primer, and the case study series. I'm going to keep this brief, just scratch the surface today, and hopefully get you excited about checking out those resources in more detail. And then we're going to get into our fireside chat with our representatives from each of the municipalities that was profiled in a case study, followed by a Q&A where these representatives will answer your questions. So we encourage you to be in the chat throughout the presentation. You can introduce yourselves, interact with each other, but when we get into the Q&A section, we are going to be taking those fresh questions from the Q&A box. So if you have questions for our municipal panelists, once we get there, please do use that Q&A function. So we'll remind you once we get to that section, but just a little bit of a heads up for you. Before we get into the content, we would like to hear from you. So we're going to use Menti for a little bit of engagement today. If you're not familiar, it's pretty straightforward to use. You'll see a QR code on your screen that'll take you to the website where you can answer this question. Or you can go to menti.com and enter the code at the top of the screen. That code is 47579727. I do recommend that you leave that tab open once you get in there. I've got a couple more questions for you. But for now, if you could just start answering, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? Okay, so the poll's working. I've got one response so far. Here we go. Great. Practical examples, guidance, learning from peers. Just pause for a moment while we see some other responses come in. Information, info, guidance, balancing growth and renewal, insights, a couple responses for learning from peers. Excellent. Okay. Hopefully you're just getting warmed up. We're gonna, as I said, we'll have another question for you. So be ready. Examples of what works. Perfect. So yeah, I think, hopefully this all seems very much like content we're going to be able to deliver for you today. Examples of what works, it's a work in progress. You'll also hear a little bit about the journeys that some of us are going on. Okay, so feel free to keep answering. Clarity, yeah, practical examples. I am going to move now into some content. As I said, do please keep Menti open. I've got a couple other questions for you. All right, so now, as I said, I'm going to share an overview of the content that we developed for this project. Lots of QR codes for you here today. This one will take you to the page on AM Ontario's website where you can access these resources. There will be a QR code on the next slide. It's going to take you to the same place. So to access the primer and the case studies, visit the QR code. So as I said, we're going to provide an overview of the resources today. I'm hoping you'll explore them in more detail after the session. This slide shows you an outline of the content that's included in Growing Wisely, a primer. So ways in which growth is being realized in Ontario, what we're seeing across different regions. Why does growth matter? What are some of the impacts? What are the consequences? Integrating growth into asset management. Obviously, this is a really key piece for us. So how are we planning for growth? How can asset management help align investment plans and implementation, mechanisms to address growth challenges and opportunities, and financial strategies, as well as the role of municipal leadership. And the other key piece of the Growing Wisely package is our case study series. So we profiled 4 different communities. We've just got a couple of them on the screen here, but you can see panelists with me from each of those communities, and I'll introduce them shortly. And each case study shows a snapshot of how that community is experiencing and managing growth, including the role that asset management can play. And so I will provide a snapshot of each of the case study before we get into the fireside chat. So with that, I will go into a little bit more detail of some of that key content from the primer. So first of all, Ontario is facing unprecedented growth. I'm sure many of you are facing that day to day. Some communities are growing at rates of over 50% from now to 2051, with all regions seeing growth of over 40%, with the exception of Northern Ontario. And so while many regions are outpacing historical growth trends, some communities are still growing slowly. And the northern and rural communities, as well as those outside major urban centers, may be experiencing a bit more modest growth, stagnating growth, or even a decline in population. Addressing all of those different growth profiles takes appropriate planning. Municipal growth has wide-ranging impacts that require a holistic, coordinated approach to address them. So these icons represent some of the most universal impacts experienced by municipalities. And the primer provides a bit more detail about each of these impacts. For communities experiencing limited growth, stagnation, or even decline, these impacts show up in different ways, including limitations to revenue generating opportunities, inadequate renewal of existing infrastructure, and the use of municipal resources to incentivize growth rather than cover its costs. So in the content today and in some of the case studies, you're going to hear a little bit more about challenges of more significant growth, but we do want to highlight, everybody's experiencing growth in different ways. And so why does growth matter? So from AMO's housing questionnaire, we saw that 64% of municipalities reported they were experiencing housing pressures, and 68% identified infrastructure gaps causing barriers to housing. So the most common, infrastructure gaps are water and wastewater, as well as roads and bridges. But we also see non-infrastructure related barriers like insufficient funding, challenges coordinating between tiers, as well as development charge cuts and freezes. Again, according to AMO's research, 84% of current asset management plans integrate growth and 9% integrate housing. So while, 84% is certainly a promising number, but in order to be effective in actually managing growth, asset management needs to be operationalized across a municipality and meaningfully influencing decision making. A disconnect between growth and asset management can lead to a variety of negative consequences for municipalities, some of which are listed on this slide. So, on the topic of impacts of growth, I'd like to get a sense of your experiences. So, we're in Menti again. So, again, hopefully you've left that open. If not, that code is on the top of the screen for you. And I'd like you to think about your municipality's likely growth scenario. What growth impacts is your municipality facing? You can select all of the pressures that apply. I'm sure for many of you, it's going to be a longer list. So again, I'll just give you a moment to start entering your responses. Yeah, so obviously already seeing that increasing population, changing demand for services really at the top of that list. Increased need to upgrade, extend, and upsize infrastructure, also seeing a lot of responses. Pressure on housing supply and affordability. I love these graphics, these interactive graphics that get to just show us the responses as they're coming in here. Changing demands, new demands, changing demographics. Okay, great. So again, please feel free to keep entering your response. Really just wanted to get a little bit of a snapshot and what's resonating for you, what's happening in your communities. I am going to move on to the next slide here. And talk about line of sight. So, as with asset management in general, when considering an aligned approach to asset management and growth, line of sight is key. So, we address this again within the primer. Plans for growth need to be aligned to a municipality's strategic and official plans and integrated into all other relevant plans and strategies. The hallmarks of an aligned approach to planning are listed on the slide. Furthermore, whole life cycle costs, levels of service, and risk management should be incorporated into decisions for procurement, design, construction, and asset acceptance requirements. And finally, in order to achieve true alignment, communication is also critical. And so you can see in the graphic, we're thinking about communication both, from your operational folks up to those decision makers, as well as from council, hopefully very bought into your plans, that direction from community and council coming down to the staff decisions as well. So really integrated communication. Okay, we're going to go to one last Menti question here. So again, thinking about your own community, can you give some examples of how you are planning for growth through your asset management plan? So I know this is some typing involved in this one, so I'll give you a few minutes to respond. Don't be shy, folks. All right, there's a response in. So including growth needs and budgets and financial projections, great. Including DC charges, estimated expansion projections into capital forecasting, perfect. Depending on the data to make informed decisions, perfect. Yeah, data is should be the foundation of your asset management plan and good decision making. Integrated resource plan with 30-year projection. Drivers are growth, renewal, and regulatory compliance. Growth-related levels of service. Excellent. Understanding cost of assets that are to be assumed, but not yet owned. Some planning, secondary studies, growth financing studies. Yeah, understand what those needs are. Integration of growth plans into long-term financial projections, updates to master plans. Perfect. So I won't read them all. Have a look through on your own. Again, do please feel free to keep entering your responses. Seeing some integration there of reserves and resource adequate to meet future levels of service. Excellent. So giving this some thought already. Um, and hopefully the examples today will help provide some further inspiration for you, food for thought. Okay, so I will wrap up on the primer by sharing some of the key takeaways. As I said, really only scratched the surface of the content today. So I do hope that you'll take the time to dig into it in more detail. But for now, I'll leave you with these four key takeaways. So, first of all, growth and asset management planning must be strategically and operationally aligned in order to sustain services. Financial resilience depends on proactive planning and a long-term asset investment approach. Municipal elected officials drive collaboration and oversight. Clear direction is needed for growth management and asset management. And then finally, collaboration with other municipalities and organizations is critical to success. So with that, I will move into a quick snapshot of each of the municipal case studies, which showcase different growth scenarios and different approaches to planning for growth. We selected municipalities of different sizes in a few different regions across the province and that are experiencing and managing growth in different ways. Okay, so first of all, the smallest municipality that we looked at, the town of Minto in Wellington County. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, Minto is expecting a significant increase in growth in the next 26 years. For context, Ontario's average growth between 2016 and 2021 was 5.8%, and the projected provincial increase to 2051 is 27.4%. So Minto is going from a slightly below average growth rate to significantly above average. This means that growth is very much on the minds of Minto's team. So when talking about the primer, I showed you those intersectional impacts of growth, which we're going to come back to again. We've broken them into those 6 categories. Minto's anticipating multiple impacts across each of these categories, but most significantly, an aging population and the influx of families is increasing the demand for healthcare. The demand for waste management services is increasing significantly. And water and wastewater services require significant capacity upgrades, and Minto has concerns about the associated capital and ongoing life cycle costs. Minto has seen some real successes in engaging the public and in collaborative planning meetings, including internal and external stakeholders. And so for some key learnings, we've seen a real culture of collaborative planning and regular planning meetings. However, there's a lack of dedicated asset management resources, which is inhibiting integration. Smaller communities often don't have the same kind of large asset management team that larger municipalities have, and growth does not pay for growth. So thinking about those funding mechanisms. So again, scratching the surface, we'll hear more from Gordon when we get into the fireside chat. Next, we will focus on the district municipality of Muskoka, a rural upper tier municipality located in central Ontario on the Georgian Bay. Muskoka has been experiencing above average growth, which is expected to continue to accelerate to 2051. Muskoka has typically been an area with a large number of second homes, representing 47% of households, but have seen increasingly more homes converted into primary residences, as well as an influx of new residents, often coming from urban communities. And that's leading to increased service expectations across the municipality. Muskoka's population is also aging, which is driving an increased demand for paramedic, acute and community care, long-term care, and accessible services. And Muskoka is also seeing pressure on attainable housing supply and affordability. Available housing is oversubscribed and costly, and council has debated the feasibility and practicality of endorsing growth when there are such existing pressures. Muskoka has been building their in-house asset management capacity and developed their AMP, their asset management plan, internally, which allowed staff to really take ownership and create strong alignment and integration with other plans, strategies, and policies, and a more holistic view of risks. The understanding developed from doing this work in-house also made it easier to start thinking about growth and about how the asset management team can be a support for other internal departments. So again, we'll hear more in the fireside chat. All right, continuing north. Next, we'll talk about the city of Thunder Bay, an urban municipality and the most populous in northwestern Ontario. Many municipalities in the north are experiencing growth differently than in the south, seeing lower than average rates of projected growth, and Thunder Bay is no exception. Historical growth has been stagnant, and while projections do show an increase, it's below the provincial average. Therefore, Thunder Bay is thinking about incentivizing growth. It's worth noting that while this growth is modest compared to the other municipalities that we've spoken about, it's still very significant for Thunder Bay. The city already has infrastructure capacity to address growth needs due to some prior upsizing, and does not want to add assets and life cycle costs that will add to the existing infrastructure funding gap. So, because of this, growth is being directed and incentivized as much as possible to areas of existing servicing and infrastructure through targeted intensification. A key challenge for the city is balancing growth incentives and the ability to pay for infrastructure. There's a need to strike a balance, incentivizing needed growth while effectively funding it. Development charges are being explored, but no changes are planned until 2030 at the earliest. Asset management is a key strength for the city. Their approach is led with consistent, universal framework of funding principles that drive all growth-related decision making, and they have a strong culture of asset management. Okay, and finally, we'll return to Wellington County to talk about the township of Centre Wellington. Centre Wellington is a lower tier municipality that is a mixture of urban and rural. The township has been experiencing above average growth historically and expects extremely significant growth into the future. The township is feeling the impacts of growth through a lack of sufficient housing and overall affordability, with the average price per home between $800,000 and $900,000. Developer provided housing is typically not affordable based on the provincial definition. So obviously significant challenges there. While housing construction is occurring, there's a lack of demand for the types of homes that are being built by developers. Unplanned growth driven by developers also presents financial and servicing challenges. In particular, water supply is a short-term bottleneck for the community, where it's anticipated that the township will have insufficient supply as early as 2027 or 2028. To address this urgent capacity challenge, the township has purchased land for the next 4 wells and has initiated the environmental assessment process for 2. So new water supply is expected to come online in 2027. A significant challenge for Centre Wellington is that growth does not pay for growth. Current growth funding mechanisms are insufficient to meet projected growth-driven infrastructure requirements. In terms of successes, the township recently had their 2025 AMP approved by council, and this plan was developed completely in-house, which I'm sure, as many of you know, can be a challenge for many smaller municipalities. This plan integrates master plans and growth plans into its analysis and also has very specific guidance to support the annual budgeting process, including assumptions on funding sources. The township's level of service approach and accompaniment to the asset management plan outlines how 10-year capital and operating plans are developed. Okay, so with that snapshot, again, scratch the surface. Please dig deeper. We are going to hear more from from representatives of each of those municipalities now, though, during our fireside chat. So here with us today, we have Dan Wilson. Dan is the Chief Administrative Officer with the Township of Centre Wellington. Full disclosure, he is also a board member and vice chair of Asset Management Ontario. We have Vineet Bhatia, Director of Tax Policy and Financial Planning with the District Municipality of Muskoka. We have Amy Coombs, Program Lead, Asset Management with the City of Thunder Bay. And Gordon Duff, Treasurer and Deputy CAO with the Town of Minto. All right, welcome everybody. So we're going to kick things off. I'm going to come back to these icons of the intersectional impacts of growth. So before I stop screen sharing, just to remind everybody what these are. And so I'm going to ask each of you, using one of the categories under our impacts of growth framework, can you share an example of a major impact facing your municipality today? And I am going to start with Dan Wilson.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to focus in on the need for infrastructure in Center Wellington, usually to upgrade or extend infrastructure because of growth. And it's going to blend a little bit of greenfield intensification development in the conversation as well. But in Center Wellington, we have extreme pressure to grow. Obviously, we have growth targets set from the province down to Wellington County that allocate our growth targets to us to 2051. We are currently, as indicated in the case study, around 32,000 people right now, growing to about 58,000 by 2051. So almost doubling in population. Our council has a strategic plan where they want to preserve farmland as well. So with growth pressures, we also, as staff, have pressures to preserve farmland. We have some of the best prime agricultural farmland in the province in Center Wellington. So that is important to our council. So in terms of a major impact, the pressure to grow is creating not only pressures from a use of farmland perspective, but an infrastructure perspective. So we have not only the need for more roads, water, wastewater, and interconnectivity, more water wells, expansions to wastewater treatment plants, but we also have the needs for more parks and recreation amenities, active transportation amenities, and we're getting to that size where we have to start considering transit as well. So the service impact of growth is going to be significant in Center Wellington. So that is the area that I'm focusing on today.
Excellent. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, pulled in a couple different directions there with the growth and the agricultural land needs. Okay, let's move next to Amy. I know you're facing some different growth challenges up in Thunder Bay. Can you share one of those impacts with us?
For sure. I hope you can hear me all right. Yeah, so we have a bit of a different situation here in Thunder Bay that we haven't grown at all, pretty much, but we really need to grow. So we've grown out instead of up. We have a very sprawling city and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of capacity. However, our population has remained pretty much stagnant for the last little while. So we need to grow and we need some new revenue sources in order to pay for all of the infrastructure that we do have. We have quite a bit of infrastructure deficit and we have a huge demand on to grow. So we're really looking at incentivizing growth, but we're really directing that growth through our asset management fundamentals. We're working on a smart growth action plan right now on, how do we grow and how do we intensify our current serviced areas to maximize the use of those assets and help pay for those assets over their life. So that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today is how do we grow? How do we pay for what we currently have and hopefully learn from all of you on how what strategies you're using for growth so that we can use that in order to grow.
Excellent. Thanks, Amy. It is nice to be able to do that planning exercise, though, and love to hear that you're bringing such a strong asset management perspective into it. Let's go next to Vineet in Muskoka.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and names on the screen. So from my end, I think I'm going to focus on particularly the pressures on housing supply and affordability and how that sort of intersects with some of the changing demographics and how sort of some of the struggles we're seeing there. So essentially under housing, what we have, Muskoka has been essentially grappling with sort of an acute shortage, I would say, of attainable housing and also escalating housing costs, which is sort of the trend within the province, right? Or rather within the country. And then essentially our existing housing stock is oversubscribed. I think that's a trend, most communities as well. expensive as well, right? So that has essentially pushed our council to debate the feasibility of accommodating significant growth, especially when a lot of these core housing pressures remain unsolved. And then what is, essentially cascading this for us, or making this even worse for us, is the demographic shift. So essentially the rapid population growth and the aging population as well, they're all compounding sort of these housing pressures for us. So when you sort of have an increase in population growth, we have historically had about 10% or so between 2016 to 21, which I think the provincial average was 5.8, right? So we've been close to double of that. We are going to have another 50% population growth, significant. We have been okay more on the water wastewater infrastructure side, because that's been okay, because there was sort of some very early on thinking for us from our previous council to build existing capacity. But then when you have such a uptick in population, the challenge you face is, especially when there is sort of urban or net intra-provincial migration that happens, and we are often a recipient of that. And when you have that, what do you see? And your population is aging too. We now have significant pressures on our paramedic services, or acute and community care, long-term care home, accessible services, right? And that is sort of becoming a significant challenge on our end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, difficult to manage that growth, as well as significant changes in service demands and expectations, for sure. All right, and last but not least, Gordon, can you speak to an example of a major impact in the town of Minto?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I think Minto falls in between Thunder Bay and Center Wellington, certainly not in population, but for so many years we weren't growing at all either. And we were really trying to attract growth, especially industrial and that too. It's really switched. I know COVID had a lot to deal with it, but also our industrial parks have basically filled out. So then we have the problem of we have jobs, but not the workforce, and the workforce doesn't have the housing. So I'm going to concentrate primarily on the infrastructure, especially to do with water. Currently, we're three little settlements, and two of them are growing quite a bit. Our water wells and supply are adequate for the existing population, but if these growth projections come anywhere near to even half, we don't, which means we need two wells, roughly $10 million that we don't have. And we have a lot of other projects. Our asset management plan keeps getting diverted because we have our list of priorities. Then a few large developments come on, like, okay, we weren't going to do that road for 15 years. We're doing it in 2 now. So things really change. And we have to change our mindset a little bit, maybe more towards Center Wellington, where instead of us incentivizing the developers, we have to get the developers to kind of say, what can you do for us? If you want to move and you want a new mill, you're going to have to contribute. So yeah, that's I think our main challenge. We have all the others too, with demographics, and well, fortunately we have a lot of parks and recreation service for our size, so we're not bad for that. But the basics, the water, the wastewater, and healthcare, we're okay, but increasing population. And I think, as Dan said, growth is not paying for growth.
Sure, very common challenge for folks in the audience as well. Okay, now that we've kind of talked through the main growth impacts in each of your communities, I'm going to just stop sharing for now so that we can all see each other a little bit better. And so I'd like to dig deeper into those impacts. So next question for everybody is going to be, how did you start to recognize that impact and develop your solution to address it? So kind of like first steps early on as the problem was emerging. Okay, so we'll go back to Dan.
Great, thank you. So the first thing we decided to do is look at do we have the appropriate land in our urban boundary to grow according to provincial requirements? And the answer was no. So we started an urban boundary expansion project with the County of Wellington, which was interesting because all landowners and developers that have land surrounding our current urban boundary were all interested in coming into the urban boundary, and we did not have that need for land. Just as a ballpark, we were proposed to bring in about 800 acres, and we had over 2,500 acres of requests to come into the urban boundary. We're trying to pick parcels of land that make sense predominantly from a servicing perspective. We want smart growth that's going to provide infrastructure in an efficient and cost-effective manner. But unfortunately, with the provincial PPS, it's sort of promoting urban sprawl, that developers can apply for an urban boundary expansion and grow the way they see fit. So I'll leave that to a little bit later on in the conversation. But so once we've decided where we want to grow, and that's a draft official plan amendment with the county, which went to the province, we started looking at our master plans and how are we going to service these areas, and started updating our water wastewater servicing plan, our parks and recreation plan, our transportation plan, and we started a transit feasibility study. So our perspective was the best way to grow is to plan first and then take action second. So these master plans are going to be a solid foundation that this council has created, that the next council can utilize to take action and service the growth that's coming into Center Wellington. So we are mindful of things like growth isn't paying for growth. So these master plans bring millions and millions of dollars of servicing needs into the community, and we can't expect development charges to pay for everything. So there will be a strain on our existing funding sources through our asset management plan for this, but we're going through that now. The first process is really finishing the master plans and having a plan in place on how we're going to accommodate growth in each of our major service areas.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So yeah, really building that foundation and trying to counter what I think is another common theme, that, developer-driven unplanned growth with a bit more of a strategic perspective. Okay, we'll go back to Amy again. Yeah, where did you get started? How did you start recognizing your challenge and developing solutions?
Yeah, so through our asset management planning, we've done 3 phases through the Ontario regulation, and we've had a asset management steering committee. Our city council has been involved quite a bit. We have quite a significant infrastructure deficit that was realized through that process. So, realizing that, okay, we have quite a bit of infrastructure deficit, our planning services department did a housing and land needs study and said, okay, we have capacity for growth. Now what do we need to do here to make these things kind of jive together? And we've recently had a new city manager come in, and he recognized, okay, we are not growing, we're not keeping up with inflation, this is a huge issue. So he created a growth department solely focused on how do we grow, let's grow. So from there, we've created a team working on our smart growth action plan, and our asset management steering committee has the commissioner of growth sitting as a representative on that steering committee. So we worked in smart growth into our asset management fundamentals, and we've been, having asset management and smart growth be a major focus and priority over the last year or so, and really looking at, how do we do this and do it well, so that we're not positioning ourselves for an even bigger infrastructure deficit into the future. So we've created a few fundamentals where smart growth and intensification is one of the key pillars, and then also doing an 80-20 funding split for renewal versus new. So really focusing on renewing the infrastructure that we do have, so that if that intensification does realize, that we can rely on that infrastructure to provide the services that are required, so that we can grow. But yeah, it's been a process, but having champions within the organization is a big part of the planning process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great to have the internal champions and that leadership from your new city manager as well.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Vineet, let's turn back to you and talk about how you initially started seeing those changes happening in Muskoka and developing your solutions.
Yeah, so no different than I think Amy and Dan. For us as well, we started to see on our end the problem really come to the forefront. Um, at the time, as soon as the pandemic started, we saw a significant change in sort of the migration patterns of residents, and we saw folks moving up to Muskoka. We saw folks making their cottages their primary places to stay, right? No one wanted to live in those cities. They wanted to come to Muskoka, and we're like, sure, this is great. Use our water wastewater plants, use all of that infrastructure, because we have been running a lot of our water wastewater plants under capacity, which a lot of times isn't good, especially for those water wastewater plants, especially sort of in the rural areas that we have. And for the context of everyone, in Muskoka we have about 9 drinking water treatment plants, 8 wastewater treatment plants, so quite the infrastructure, and a lot of it is built on the Canadian Shield, which makes it even more complex to build and put those pipes in, that infrastructure in, right? So we saw folks moving up here. We saw we saw that sort of, and then we saw, as people started to move up here, we saw a whole bunch of discussions at the council level, and a whole bunch of developer requests to sort of move forward on putting in sort of new homes, advancing on their approved plans that they had not been moving forward on. And we saw sort of all of those challenges, sort of come to the front and center of attention. And then, so we said, okay, this is a part of the challenge, right? And then along with this, council and community, we also have in housing affordability and supply constraints already, right? So how are we addressing that piece as well? So sure, growth is great. We're getting growth. We're working on it. We'll work through together as a community, right? But it's expensive, right? And so we said, okay, sure. As a result, let's have a team tasked to focus on our 10-year affordable and attainable housing and homelessness strategy. So we sort of embarked on that journey. Fast forward, I think late 23, early 24, our council essentially approved a $30 million plan and we funded that over 5 to 8 years to not only sort of construct new homes, but also sort of build the capacity within our trades and housing sector, so that we have the trades folks available and all of that, so we don't see sort of the prices and affordability get worse with time. And we said, okay, sure, this is nice. We sort of worked through this. Now the other challenge was targeting growth, right? So we didn't really want the growth in urban centers. We wanted to look at sort of the areas outside our urban centers or in close proximity to our urban centers, so we can target growth there, because we did have sort of a lot of water wastewater plans that were underutilized, right? So we started sort of, our council and our planning team started sort of a planning concierge and things like that to work with developers and the applications that come in to make sure we are focusing that growth in those areas in particular, and how we fast track those developments first. So I think that's sort of what we have been doing. So our 10-year housing, $30 million housing plan, quite expensive for us. Never done this ever in the history of Muskoka. And then sort of targeting growth towards areas where infrastructure is already readily available. So that way folks don't have to wait in the pipeline to get access or connect to our existing water wastewater infrastructure. So I think those two things are targeted. And I think lastly, what we did was, now that we've been building capacity in-house, we had a lot of initially, we had sort of some pushback on building the stuff in-house, but what has happened eventually now, I think we as staff have made that informed decision, and we have gotten buy-in from our senior management, our directors, our management, our subject level experts, everyone, that if they're working on master plans, those master plans need to be tied in with our asset management plan, which eventually needs to be tied in with our capital and operational budgets. If all of them are working together, and then in the end, obviously the strategic plan, right? If all of them are speaking the same language, all of us can work towards that goal that council wants, that community wants. And if they're not, and if there's a disconnect, then we may miss that opportunity on addressing one particular area. So I think that's sort of what our focus has been.
Excellent. Well, alignment. I mean, you're speaking my language there, Vineet. Love to hear it. Interesting also to hear that common ground with Thunder Bay. Obviously, a different scenario, but that sort of targeted intensification towards areas where there's already sufficient capacity. So, different growth scenarios, but using some similar approaches there. All right. So last but not least here, Gordon. yeah, how did you start recognizing some of the challenges? I think it seems like they were pretty apparent again during COVID, but if you want to dig in a little bit more to that for
Um,
us.
yes, like Vineet, we had what we call the GTA refugees and the Kitzer and Guelph people that started appearing and of course wanting city services in a rural setting, and which is a challenge. Again, as I mentioned to Jennifer in our initial discussions, we started having kind of joint internal meetings with our planning, our engineer staff, our water, wastewater, roads, finance, and clerks department. And we kind of try to get an idea of what's coming down the pike. What do we have to do? And the issue, like if you've got a long-standing subdivision that might be 10 or 15 years old, it's got draft approval for 75 single-family houses. And now the new developer says, well, that's nice. I'd like 350 semi-townhouses and all that. And then they go, well, our pipe is 4 inches and oh, we need high pressure for fire service. So it just ripples right through. And we're always doing those reserve capacity studies too. And yeah, we're looking really good, to 2041 that, well, if all this goes and then other things come, we're not good. And we also took 23, 24 to update our strategic plan, economic plan, culture plan, parks and rec plan. In addition, as we all know, we're all working on the provincially mandated asset management plans. And that's, I think Denis put his finger on this, try to get that all together and, work on the grants. I mean, small municipality, we're very dependent on capital grants. Like even we were just doing a budget discussion this morning and go, well, that project will go if we get the grant. Otherwise, not only we can barely afford our share, but we certainly can't afford the 100%. It doesn't mean the need for the project goes away either. So I think that's where it came. It's just internal communications and then seeing, and then we've moved from maybe local small developers to the larger developers coming. And we've had to hire on a development technician, and we really lean on our engineers, but we're starting to deal with organizations that have much more expertise than we do in all areas. So that's a challenge too.
Absolutely. And I assume that was also a consequence of that, like increased growth coming in from the GTA and other parts of Ontario. Okay, so I do want to make sure we have enough time for the Q&A. We've got a couple questions I see in the box already. I'm going to wrap us up here with a lightning round. Quickly, I'm going to just remind participants, please do use that Q&A box for questions for the panel. I've seen a couple questions come into the chat. We're going to prioritize the Q&A box, so get them in there. Feel free to copy and paste them over. Okay, so very quick answers on our final lightning round question here. You've already started to address sort of who was part of the conversation. I've loved hearing it seems like there's a lot of integration. So I'm going to ask, as you were, so who were you talking to and what were some of the challenges you faced as you started to develop the solutions? So who was part of those conversations and what bumps did you hit along the road? And yeah, asking for lightning round style responses. So because you might have to reformulate for a minute from a longer answer, does anybody want to volunteer to go first for me? I'll take Vineet and then Dan.
Yeah, I think we brought in, and I'm sure the panel will probably have same responses. We brought in not only our district council, but our senior leadership team, our planning staff, our financial planning team, and all the subject matter experts who are directly working on sort of those infrastructure problems and solving those challenges in developing solutions. I think for us, it was more of the infrastructure funding uncertainty, changes to your revenue sources. We're seeing that front and center in media now, changes to your sort of DCs and how you collect money for DCs. Clearly, the government, the province doesn't like them. Clearly, developers hate them, right? So the infrastructure funding uncertainty, balancing service level expectations. I think that was another challenge that we are actively working on. And lastly, sort of synchronizing our growth plan and our asset management framework together so that they work hand in hand. So that's sort of, I think that should round out the answer.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vineet. Nice and succinct. Dan, please go ahead.
Yes, what was important for us is we developed an internal staff growth working group early to talk about every 2 weeks what's going on growth wise that we need to talk about. We've kept the county up to speed as much as we could through all of this, and obviously constant reports to council about impacts of growth so that they understand exactly what's going on. Challenges, the major challenge for us right now is, I mentioned 2,500 acres of land wanting to come in when we only needed to bring in 800 acres into our urban boundary. Every landowner thinks that they have the priority land to come into the urban boundary. So it's a very interesting conversation, how they all have studies that prove that their land is the most serviceable and the most expandable from an urban boundary perspective. And we're trying to sort through that.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Gordon, I see you've unmuted. Please take it away.
I'll agree with everything Dan said. We have the same thing. Not so much the 2,500 and the 800, but sometimes, again, we got 3 settlements and we wanted to add to one municipality. And then the county was thinking, no, you're adequate there. We want to add at our smaller one, but our smaller one's got a developer all lined up and ready to go. So I think that's the other thing. We're trying to lean on our larger employers because it's their workforce demands that are contributing to the housing shortage. So we are still working with them, 2 or 3 of them, to see maybe financially or maybe otherwise they might do it. We're fortunate where we live. I'm sure we've all heard the federal government came out a couple of weeks ago, really putting an emphasis on modular houses. We have quality homes and royal homes within half an hour of us. And I think they're up in mid-northern Ontario too. So maybe we can get them on board, but we're trying to hook up the employer and the developer and of course the county and local planning staff too, and get everybody to come up with a creative solution. And Wellington County has a small bit of surplus money that they're going to distribute to the lower tiers. Maybe it's more like a seed, but it's not going to solve all our problems. But maybe we can find a model that works and we'll try and lessen the demand on our infrastructure.
Well, still, I'll try to figure it out, right? Okay, and finally, Amy.
Okay, I'll try and go fast. So I think who is involved, everybody is involved in asset management within the city of Thunder Bay. We've been really trying to break down silos and get everybody to understand that we're all asset managers and we're all trying to work together. So that's been one of our big education campaigns, and it all starts with our leadership, right? So our city manager has been kind of a great asset in that regard, is trying to get that message out to everybody. But also with growth, we've been trying to, get everybody involved from the development community, the Economic Development Commission, Indigenous community partners, all sorts of everybody, reaching out to everybody across the community, including all of our citizens. We've had numerous asset management surveys go up, and now input into our smart growth action plan. So trying to get everybody involved in asset management and smart growth, and connecting those dots and really educating the community on what that means, but also educating our staff on what that means, because growth can be a few different things, and how we grow in the future could really hinder us or help us. So we really want to do it right. And our biggest challenge is balancing that, right? Balancing growth incentives and the ability and affordability of our infrastructure. So that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you all. I know it's hard to pack detailed responses into such short amount of time. I will say all of our wonderful presenters today have also volunteered to share their contact info through our case studies. So if you have other questions for them, their contact info is in those case studies that you had the QR code for, so you can follow up. I think we might, Erin, I think we might be a little tight on time. Do you want to try and pack in a question before we wrap?
I don't think that we can pack in a question. However, we do have four great ones, so we'll work with the panelists to actually get some answers for those, and we'll send them out to our attendees today.
Excellent solution. Thank you. Yeah, apologies. Just so much great discussion. So we'll wrap up there. I want to really thank all of our panelists for being here with us today and sharing your experiences, as well as for your contributions to the case studies themselves. And thank you very much to AMO for hosting and to all of our participants for coming out today. So, we really want to keep the conversation going. So, great suggestion, Erin, on those questions. And yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Take care.